Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and welcome to Conscious 2. My guest in the studio today is Tejo. Hi, Tejo.
Hi, Alex.
And Tejo is a teacher of the Diamond Approach, which is a spiritual path developed by A.H. Almas. And in today's interview, we're going to be talking about the inner critic. And I think this is something that probably a lot of people watching will have had some kind of probably painful personal experience with. And in this interview, we're going to talk about what it is, where it comes from, and also hopefully give a few practical tips that can help you to work with it. So, Tejo, I guess maybe a good starting point is, what is this thing called the inner critic?
What is it? It's that part of us that won't leave us alone, that tends to ride us, tends to judge us, tends to assess us, compare us with others in a often negative, sometimes positive light. So it's that sort of almost constant companion that we're largely unaware of, directing our actions and feelings, thoughts, things like that.
Yeah, and I guess often when we first become aware of it, it's often quite a surprise that this thing that's been there the whole time, affecting, driving our life in a sense, that we've often not been aware of truly until we start to see it.
Yeah, I think it's something that we align with for a very long time. We're either rebelling against it or we're doing its bidding, and at a certain point, often when we set out on some kind of path of inner awakening, one of the first things we become aware of is just how prevalent this inner voice, this inner director is.
Yeah, and I guess in a sense, when you say inner director, that's kind of what it feels like. I certainly say in my experience, it was like I realized almost everything in my life was being informed or directed by that voice.
Yeah, and it's if we begin to become aware of it and see really how global it is, how prevalent in our consciousness, then we have to start to ask, what is this? Where does it come from? And often it comes with such a lot of painful and debilitating direction.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I think sometimes the more we try to be quiet, again, I talk from a kind of my, I should say that I've been a student of the school and, the groups that you're involved in running for quite a few years. And certainly I remember at the start, it was like the quieter I went, the louder it seemed to get. I'd be sitting there trying to meditate and I was basically just informing myself how I wasn't doing it very well, how I should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I think that we have to get a little quieter, a little stiller before we begin to notice it. Otherwise, mostly what we're sort of aware of is just the way it makes us feel, which is often we feel shitty, we feel put down, we feel deficient, we feel not good enough. And so we do all these things to combat that. But once we start to get silent, start to get still, we begin to see it for what it really is. Just a barrage of assessments and judgments.
Yeah. One of the things you were saying before we started filming was that, in a sense, there are two different ways, in a sense, they can show up. There's the inner critic in someone's life, but there's also the inner critic in their kind of spiritual practice. I don't know if you want to just touch on that. It's a kind of helpful distinction.
Yeah, I mean, the inner critic it's this structure that really develops in childhood, but it's a structure that morphs and grows with us. So when we're a teenager, it's probably going to judge us for how we look, what we're wearing, comparing ourselves to others. Then we get out there in the world and we get a job and we get constant input about how we're not doing the job well enough. And then maybe we step on a spiritual path And it's the same story, but now it's directed on the, I'm not a good meditator, and the person next is a better meditator. But the whole atmosphere is to keep us feeling a very particular way, kind of keep us feeling deficient in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I guess until there's some clarity on what's happening, and we're not aware of it, we also believe it to be true, in a sense. I mean, there's a kind of whole thing of just colluding and...
Very good, yeah. I think that's why it is so powerful, is because it feels true. We don't have another perspective when we're identified with this inner critic. And usually there's an element of truth in the judgment. So one of the things we have to learn how to do is separate that element of truth from you're bad because you do it. Yes. You're wrong because you do it. That aggressive, very spiteful, judgmental attitude towards ourselves.
Yeah, I guess it's a thing of, does the punishment meet the crime? It's kind of...
Yeah. You know, as a child, our parents gave us a lot of different messages. They needed to. We're little wild animals that need to be tamed.
You described my youngest daughter.
Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah. Little wild animals need to be tamed, and the parents do their best to guide and tame this little animal soul. But the way that gets received, as a child, we're so identified with our emotions and our actions are the same thing. If we're angry as a little boy, we're not just inwardly angry, it's all over the place. Yeah. And when our parents say stop it, we take that very personally. It's a criticism about us. We shouldn't be that way. The way I am is wrong. That's the kind of conclusion we come to. That's the same thing that's happening to us as adults or teenagers. There's truth in that maybe we shouldn't eat a whole tub of ice cream. Probably not best for us. But is there any need, if we've done that, if we've overstepped the mark, to berate ourselves? Does that really help?
I guess in that instance, it probably makes us likely to want to eat more because we want to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah, because it's painful. When we get berated, it's painful. So we get in a whole relationship with this judge. And it can be a combative relationship, which is keeping the engagement with it. Another option might be that we see, yep, okay, I did it again. I ate too much ice cream. I wonder why. I wonder why I keep doing this. So there's more of an open curiosity rather than this onslaught of judgment, which just keeps a repetitive motion going.
Yeah, and I guess with that kind of open curiosity, there's the potential for something to be seen or something else to happen, rather than just stay in the kind of the loop with it.
Exactly, and it's the loop that's so painful. And I think most of us have had or got areas in our life where we get caught in this loop of doing something a certain way, an onslaught of judgment and putting ourselves down, and then we do it again, and the same thing happens. There's no getting off.
Yeah, and can you say something about, there are some different styles, let's say, of how people will respond to the inner critic. You know, you were saying that you can get caught in a kind of fight with it, but there's no different. Can you just say something about some of the different patterns or different ways people may be engaging with it?
Yeah, well, one of them is that we can get into a sort of rebellious thing about it and basically do the opposite of it. We know what's best, we get judged for it, we tell it to piss off, and we do the same thing again. So that we're engaged in a kind of combative way. And
we think we're getting free from it, but actually...
We think we're getting free from it. The rebel thinks they are free. The truth is that for a rebel to be free, they have to let go of that which they're rebelling against.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
and then the rebel has to dissolve. So it's the same with the superego. If we fight it, we're not free.
Mm. Yeah.
Another way we often experience it is collapse. We can notice our energy feels depleted. We notice we can get depressed. It feels like there's this weight on us. And often the experience of this critic is it's back here somewhere.
Mm.
And it feels like it's pushing us down, won't let us up. It's got all the energy, we don't got any, and we just feel bad.
Mm.
We just feel like we're a bad person, we're wrong, and it's hard to move through life when we feel that way.
Yeah, in a sense, I guess it takes away the very strength that in some ways we need to free ourselves from it. That's what it can feel like.
Exactly. It's got all the juice.
Yeah.
And one of the things we have to learn at a certain point is how to reclaim that juice. It's our juice, actually.
Right.
It's just caught up in this structure of criticism and assessment and judgment. It's the inner judge.
Yeah, yeah. And you also use the term superego, which is also another term for it, which I seem to remember that it was as a Freudian term, which is also translated as the over I from the Uber,
right.
Which is, I guess, another way you were saying it kind of feels like it's sat on top of us. It's like kind of there's another us on top of us, kind of judging and criticizing.
It's really the glue of the ego structure is one way of looking at it. By holding up these ideas of how we're supposed to be, which we got from our society, our mom and dad, our schools, priests, holding up these ideas, measuring us against them, we constantly don't meet the ideals. So we're constantly feeling a little bit less than.
Yes. And as you said, the ideas change. So even if we get close to the idea, it's like it becomes then a new idea.
It's a moving bar. We don't make it.
Yeah.
And by design.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you mentioned it's like it's the glue that holds together the ego structure because, of course, as an adult, we have more, hopefully have more coping strategies and more kind of capacity to self-care. Maybe not, but hopefully we do as a child. But yet, this structure follows us right through our life. Can you just say something about why it stays in place in the way that it does, and the kind of some of the function that it serves in doing that?
Well, it's got to do really with who we take ourselves to be, who we self-image. Let's say, for instance, you got a self-image of being a nice guy. Now, a lot of those.
I can identify with that.
You can identify with that. So, what if the nice guy suddenly finds himself in a situation where he's absolutely raging furious? That's not part of the nice guy self-image. The superego will latch on to that anger, that fury. No. It'll judge the hell out of you for it. It'll put you down for it. It'll make you wrong for having those feelings, thus maintaining the nice guy image.
But of course, in maintaining that, keeping away a whole set of resources and energy.
Absolutely. But if you like, spiritual work is about dissolving all these ways we take ourselves to be, so that our consciousness has room to expand. And the inner critic does not like expansion.
Yeah.
It wants you to say pretty much the same, because it's safe.
Which I guess is why I know in the diamond approach that the inner critic, or the superego as it's called in that tradition, is generally the first piece which is taught, because it's what gets provoked, in a sense, when there's expansion that starts to happen.
Exactly. I mean, the main method in the diamond approach really is inquiry, where we use a sort of we use presence and felt sense experience to inquire into what's happening with us. what's so amazing is that almost without fail, and at an introductory workshop on inquiry, the first thing that people ask questions about is the fact that they feel that they shouldn't be feeling the way they're feeling.
Or they can't do inquiry.
Right, I'm doing the inquiry wrong.
Yeah.
You know, there may be that we can hone our inquiry, but being wrong is such a global thing to say about somebody, about our own experience, or about the other way this shows up, which is judging other people.
So a kind of externalization of the structure.
Yeah, that's one of the ways we defend against it. Against feeling it is we make the other wrong, or we make the world wrong, or we judge the person who's meditating next to us because they're breathing too heavily and they're disturbing our meditation. Or, you know, rather than judging ourselves for the fact that we can't concentrate, it's their fault that I can't concentrate.
Yeah. Which I guess can lead to a kind of slightly inflated kind of feeling, but also it's keeping a distance from the world. I guess is that part of the effect?
Well, it certainly has that effect of distancing, but it's also just an inaccurate way of viewing reality. That one thing is better than another. It's like saying that a size 8 shoe is better than a size 6 shoe.
Right.
You know, we can compare because we need to compare. We need to see that that's a size 8 and that's a size 6. But to compare and say that's better and that's not as good, with an assessment and a judgment, is a very painful thing to do to other people and to do to ourselves.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of the effect as well. You know, you're saying part of it is it keeps us stuck where we are.
Right.
But it's also very painful. I guess that's the other piece of it.
You know, I was in Italy for the last few years. I had a lot to do with an arts atelier there, where every day the teachers would come around and give what the students called a critique of, they were doing portraiture. And it was so very clear to see that there were some teachers who could give a crit without any hint of a judgment. It's just like, this is what needs to happen, and if you do this, this will happen. And then there was the teachers who weren't quite as skilled, who there was an edge of basically judgment or possibly making the student feel a certain way about themselves in relationship to what they were saying.
Yeah.
And I think that stems from when we were young and our parents wanted us to do better at school, and they'd judge us hoping that it would make us try harder. Right. And I think sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But the residue of it is that we believe that for us to achieve, we have to get on ourselves about it.
Yeah. And also, interesting in the example you gave, where sometimes we can be given feedback that genuinely doesn't have judgment, but we project judgment onto it. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, so the projection of the inner critic is one of the main ways we defend against it. Certain personality types tend to project more than others. But an example might be is that we're in a group of people and we stand up and ask a question. And it's a perfectly fine question, and the teacher gives an answer, and we sit down, and then all hell breaks loose. What is everybody thinking about me? That was such a stupid question. They're going to think I'm a real idiot. No one will have lunch with me. Whatever it'll be. Yeah. And what it is our judgment, and the aggression in that judgment is projected out on everybody else. and seen as coming from out there towards me,
Yeah.
whereas actually it's coming from within here. That's a really common way we experience judgment, is that we feel judged when most people actually,
They're too busy judging themselves.
they're too busy judging themselves. And the truth is, if somebody judges us and we don't have that judgment about ourselves, it just doesn't land.
Right. Right.
It just doesn't land. It's like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's not my experience.
Yeah. There's a lot more we could say here, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time exploring some of the things that we can do with it. And I know I know it's a big topic, and I know within the Diamond approach, it's the subject of a lot of different kind of ways. But can you just start? We got kind of 10 minutes or so. Can you, well, for 5 minutes or so, can you give us perhaps some ways in that people watching this that I guess may be resonating, of what they can start to do to work with that?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is identify what's going on, or at least recognize that I'm under attack. And we call it an attack because it really, when we really feel it, it feels like an attack. Yeah. We are being attacked by pretty aggressive, judgmental, inner voice of some sort. So we need to recognize that's happening. We do that usually because we feel the effects of it. We feel deficient, we feel I've done something wrong, we feel scared, anxious. Another place we get really anxious when we're anticipating an attack. So sometimes if we're feeling anxious, we can look around and we can't see anything in our life that would make us anxious. Yeah, we need to check out whether there's something that our inner critic is wanting to say to us.
Yeah.
So we need to recognize by being more in touch with ourselves.
And is it worth just saying a short thing around how the inner critic can also develop over the phrase that's in my mind is a spiritual inner critic. How we think we've done the work on it because we're not having those horrific kind of, you're a complete this. It's more subtle. I don't know if you want
it gets, the deeper, more subtle we become in our capacity to experience reality, the more subtle the superego becomes. And as long as we've got a self, as long as we've got an ego, we're going to have a superego. Right. It's part of the deal.
It's what we signed up for.
It's part of the deal. And so the only sure bet here really is to go beyond the self, and then the superego, you go beyond that as well. So it does get more subtle, and it attacks us in different ways, often non-verbally. Often we just get a sense that we are wrong. Our very existence is wrong. It can feel like that. It's not so much what we've done. That's more sort of, we encounter that near the beginning. But the deeper we go, the very fact of us gets judged, gets assessed. So it does get more subtle and deeper. So we need to notice that there is the key thing here is we're being criticized, we're being judged, assessed, we're being compared to. Whether it's with a negative or positive hint, it doesn't really matter. That is the inner critic. And that's what we need to recognize to start with. Once we've recognized it, sometimes it can be helpful to try and understand, where does that judgment, where's the source of that judgment? With all respect to all parents, very often the source of it is in some of the interactions we had as a child with our parents. We came away feeling that there was something wrong about the way we are. It just seems to be the way it is. So we need to get to the source of it so that we can have more understanding.
Yes.
And then we've got some different options open to us. Sometimes just being aware of it and recognizing, oh, it's Dad again. You know, we can let it go because that was then and this is now. Often we've got our dad criticizing us and our father's been dead for years. We're carrying that voice inside. So recognizing that and seeing that can help disengage. Another way is really when we understand how much pain this is causing us. We really have to get to see that this is causing us suffering. When we get that, something begins to shift.
Yes.
We start refusing to tolerate it anymore.
Right. And I guess in that, all of that energy which has been taken away, which, as you were saying earlier, is actually our power or our energy. We actually start to use some of that, I guess, in the defense against it.
Absolutely. It's when I always say, when we see how much suffering the inner critic causes us, we start to get mad.
Right.
And it is that energy of enough, stop, I'm not going to take it anymore, that can begin to give us a little bit of distance from it. And that little bit of distance is so important because most of the time we're like this. There's no gap. But if we can get a little bit of distance, a little bit of space, just a little bit of space is huge.
Yeah. We're out of time.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot more that we could say.
Yeah, we could.
But for people which want to kind of explore a bit more in terms of the diamond approach, do you want to give the website of the UK groups? We'll put it on the screen if it's not fresh. It's not fresh in my mind. It may not be in yours. So we can put it on the screen if needed.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's ridwan.org. We'll have and that's ridhwan.org. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tejo.
You're welcome, Alex.
Appreciate it.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. And we look forward to talking to you again, hopefully very soon on Conscious Tea. Bye-bye.